Welcome to another episode of Raiders of the Unknown. We have a special guest, and our topic is exorcism. We would like for Rabbi Zucker to tell us about his background and his interest on that topic. Again, welcome to our show.
So, exorcism, the notion that a body, that somebody is possessed somehow by a spirit, goes back. Certainly, we know about it in relatively modern times. There's some indications, we're very, very limited information, but we have some indication that the notion that one was caught up by an evil spirit, one finds that in very rare circumstances already in biblical times.
Can you tell us about your interest in that topic and why bring it up now? In my work as a chaplain, no one ever talks about exorcism, and it's almost like part of the intellectualism where anything mystical is considered to be psychological. Why is it important to address it now as something relevant?
Well, just to give you some background in terms of my personal interest in this, I was a chaplain, Jewish chaplain in a long-term care nursing facility. And I was very active at the time in the National Association of Jewish Chaplains. And so I did some research on the whole notion of exorcism. And I, to my own surprise, found out that certainly there is material, not so much biblical material, but from the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, which speaks about exorcism. And that whole question really came about. And again, this is just relating my own personal experience, that some nurses came to me and as the chaplain and said that in a certain room in the nursing home, they had a series of unfortunate encounters, that there were people who caused problems, or there were deaths in that particular room. And they asked me if there was some way to create an exorcism from that room. And I said, well, I really don't know about that. But I started doing some research and found out that there, in fact, was a precedent for that notion of doing some sort of exorcism. So in time, I developed a ritual, and to my own surprise, it worked. And so I shared some of those experiences at a national convention at a workshop.
Can you tell us what this ritual entails, and does it have any correlation with? I assume that the nurses were Christian, and there's a strong history of the life of Jesus and maybe other people throughout history who conducted exorcisms. Was it something that they connected with, or something that it was particular from your tradition?
No, that's a very good insight. I think you're absolutely right that they happen to be Christians. I have no idea if they're active Christians in that sense, going to church regularly, but I think just part of their Christian experience that they were aware of the notion of exorcism and turned to me and said, this is a Jewish nursing home. You're the chaplain here, the rabbi here. Could you help us with this? So it very much came out of their own background and experience, at least the request to look into the whole question of exorcism.
In Hasidic circles, or maybe some Jewish mystical circles, they talk about Psalm 91, which is used also in the Christian community when someone dies, or to expel the darkness and the pestilence, as it says in the Psalm. Did that have something to do with the ritual that you created, or what are the parts to it?
Well, no doubt there are people who regard evil spirits and somehow a spirit entering somebody. That certainly is not the case if we're talking about mainstream Judaism. I think that if you arbitrarily just took the first 100 people that you randomly ran into, that most of them, probably 99% of them, would say exorcism, that's not a Jewish thing. So it's not something which is generally known amongst laity and the Jewish community.
But there's a movie called Possession where they have a Jewish actor play a rabbi, and he does expelling of the book or a spirit of a deceased person who is connected to a young lady. Is that the popular version, or is that something that can be connected to Jewish tradition?
Yeah, I'm aware that there are traditions within this broad thing called Judaism, that there is a belief that there are evil spirits which could enter into somebody. The term for this kind of evil spirit or dark spirit that enters person is the word dybbuk. Now, dybbuk, Dybbuk, the root of that word is to connect or to cleave, to connect with something. So the dybbuk in that sense connects with the person. And according to people who take this seriously and who believe this, that one can then perform some kind of ceremony to exorcise this dybbuk from the person. Usually the dybbuk, again, generalizing here, the dybbuk is some sort of somebody who had died in the past, but hasn't, continues to live in some fashion or another, and enters a person's body and causes problems of some sort or another.
Are you familiar with the story of I don't know if it was Rabbi Akiba or another rabbi from the Talmud that goes to Rome to talk to the emperor? And there's two versions. One, it was a servant of the emperor, Caesar, and another one, it was his daughter who was possessed by a demon. And then he had the Ring of Solomon, which either has the name of God or has a root in it. And they were able to get that spirit out. It was almost like an unclean spirit, as mentioned in the New Testament. And it was Vespian, the Caesar. Are you familiar with that story?
No, I'm not. I haven't heard that anecdote before.
So the idea from the Bible that there is demonic forces, either gods of the other tribes who were personified in demons, or that there is some type of goats that people worship in the mountains or things like that. Did that come across in your research?
No, first of all, none of what you just said is biblical. There are no biblical statements about tribes with demons or going to the mountains with demons. And I don't know where you picked that up, but that's not biblical. What you do find in the Bible, for instance, in the book of Samuel, the first King Saul, is we would probably use words like he was depressed, but the term that is used in the Bible is that he was visited by an evil spirit from God, and at the same time there is David, who eventually will become the second king of Israel. But David comes and plays his lyre, his harp, in front of Saul, and according to the biblical text in the book of Samuel, the evil spirit leaves Saul. Now, if we were describing that today in modern terms, we might say that by perhaps playing calming music or whatever, the person who was upset was no longer upset. But that's one of the rare biblical statements which speak about an evil spirit entering, in this case, King Saul, who was, the Bible doesn't use the word exorcise, but David's music playing on the lyre, the harp, if you want, in that sense, exorcised Saul's difficult spirit.
So tell us, did the Psalms of David help to kind of cleanse this room? Is that what you used to help bring about this result?
What I did, I mean, in terms of, I created a ritual, and the ritual spoke about the fact that it would appear that there are some difficulties in this room, things which seem to be here, and in Jewish tradition, one places a mezuzah, which is a little box with some quotations from the Bible in it, and one puts this on the doorposts of the room. And so, as part of this ritual, we took the mezuzah which was there and exchanged it for a new mezuzah. I recited some prayers asking that if there is anything malevolent here, may that disappear. I encouraged that people would and I read a few Psalms, quotes from Psalms, and as I say, exchanged the mezuzah. And all I can say is, in my experience, it worked. That whatever difficulties they were having in that particular room, that seemed to clear the matter. Another thing I did was, in this particular nursing home, each room had windows going to the outside. So as part of this ritual, we opened the window and I said words to the effect of, if there is anything here like an evil spirit, may it flee or leave through the window. And again, I don't pretend to understand how it worked. All I know is that by creating this kind of ritual, that it seemed to resolve the difficulties in that particular room.
In the movie The Exorcist, they say that there might be a scientific version of what could happen with a person who is possessed, or a building that is possessed, where if you bring a religious authority, that the people are either involved or are being oppressed by this, give them the authority or believe that they have the power to get rid of this, that psychologically speaking, they're released from that fear. Do you think that could have been a factor with the nurses?
Broadly speaking, yes, I would buy into that kind of broadly psychological explanation, that if people felt that there was something malevolent, that you bring in a religious authority, and if you accept the person's religious authority and accept the words that person is saying, that yes, I can see it can be very positive.
There's one tradition that I'm familiar with where, Lilith is known as the demoness that hurts children in Jewish mystical thinking. And I've heard that you can write the names of the 4 angels in the crib of a baby to protect them from Lilith. Have you come across that idea that there is one of the wives of Adam who became a demoness, and then she can come after children and night?
The notion that Adam had a first wife whose name was Lilith, that's part of the homiletic, the midrashic tradition within Judaism. And there were stories written and sermons offered, which when eventually got written down as midrash, as homiletic explanations. And yes, that speaks about Lilith as a kind of negative spirit. So you get stories told about this, but just because they are traditional stories doesn't mean that there is a validity to it in the sense of that one could prove this scientifically. It's more what I would call human beliefs, folk beliefs in that sense.
I heard a silly interpretation from Rabbi Jacobson, who's a disciple of the Rebbe uh, Schneerson, and he was saying that the halakhic scholar Maimonides either believed or did not believe in demons, and then the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, believed in them, and that somewhere in between, demons disappeared, either before or after the debate between the mystical and the more rational thinking in Judaism. What do you think about those type of debates?
Well, there are people who believe in evil spirits and believe that there's that whole extra world. I would say that most Jews today, again, if you asked the first arbitrary 100 Jews that you run into, 99% would say, no, of course, that's just folk belief. That's not is not reality. It may be part of a tradition, but that doesn't make it real. I mean, just to give you but one example, in the United States, we have this myth about George Washington and the apple tree. And so if I ask you, did that really happen? I presume that you would say, no, that's part of sort of American civic folklore. And I would put belief in demons and whatnot in that sense, part of Jewish folklore kind of traditions. But it's not, it's not scientifically valid in that sense.
And what was the response of the National Association of Jewish Chaplains, as well as the Christian chaplains that you've talked recently to, regarding this experience that you had?
I'm sorry, what about that?
What was the response of other Jewish clergy that you talked to, and now Christian clergy that you've shared this experience with?
Yeah, I think that people who hear about my experience say, and they take my word for it, that whatever had been in that room seemed to disappear. There are things in this world which are beyond our understanding. I don't know how it works. All I do know is that it was successful. I think that in a broad sense, that it's a variation of pastoral care and listening and being with somebody in their journey and accepting the validity of what they're saying and what they're experiencing. And so the Jewish chaplains and the non-Jewish chaplains who heard my story said, yes, it makes sense. We don't always have the explanation of why it makes sense.
Do you think that going along with someone's fear that there is an entity in the room will lead for more fear and more almost like you're validating that, versus if you take a psychological approach, you are more dismissive and maybe considering hallucinations or some other type of natural explanation? Do you think it's dangerous to go along with a spiritual perspective if it's destructive?
Well, I think that in terms of pastoral counseling, that you have to walk over to their side of the street. That you can't, you have to honor what they're saying and accept that they regard what they're saying as reality. And you start there and you talk it through but yes, I think you validate what they're saying, then you can perhaps take it in some other direction. But it seems to me more effective if you, as I say, walk over to their side of the street and validate that that's what they're hearing, that's what they're experiencing.
In one of my classes in Jewish Health and Healing, we were discussing how in the Babylonian Talmud, it mentions that there's sicknesses that are connected to some type of dark spirits. And I was easily to dismiss that as maybe a poor interpretation or an interpretation that was non-scientific. And my professor pointed out that what is it back then when they didn't have microscopes or more knowledge about the natural world, what is it other than in a dark forest, to get sick when you drink water that's polluted, to have an illness in your flesh that you cannot overcome. So that was their way of discussing natural occurrences. Would you agree with that perspective?
Well, if we're talking about the Talmud is a vast Jewish law book, which has well over 1 million different words as part of the Talmud itself. Just to give you a sense of size, the Talmud is something like 1.4 million words. Compare that to the Jewish Bible, which is less than 9,000 words. So there's a tremendous amount of material in the Talmud. Indeed, there are two different Talmuds. There's what's called the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. And in the Babylonian Talmud, which was obviously written in Babylonia, and that was what today more or less would be modern Iraq, that the rabbis who were part of that were clearly influenced by Babylonian traditions. And Babylonian traditions, we know from other sources, believed in these kinds of demons, and so, or evil spirits or whatever. So you get notations, you get paragraphs in the Talmud which speak about evil spirits. So that was their way, a non-scientific way, but it was their way of explaining what we might today call somebody with some mental health issues.
In your experience in the history of Judaism, have you seen a return to a more mystical and open to the magic and the supernatural, instead of what was happening for many years, where it was very intellectual and rational, and more academic in the being able to prove texts and things like that, as compared to going more with the senses and the imagination and things like that?
Well, again, Judaism is such a wide area, and different traditions within Judaism. I would say there always has been, or not always, that there has been for a long time a minority subset of people who believe in mysticism and that kind of tradition. And there are people today who study that. How seriously they take it, I don't know. Kabbalah and this kind of mystical tradition is not an interest of mine, and so I have no personal experience in terms of studying Kabbalah, and I know of a few people just by information that I've heard who are studying Kabbalah, but that's not part of my background.
In movies, whenever they talk about someone being oppressed, somehow they always make it seem like God is nowhere to be found. The person is going through convulsions, they're feeling sick, they're acting out of character, and then God shows up way at the end with the priest or whomever to try to get that out of their system. What is your perspective of God's active work in the world? What happened between the revelation of Sinai, the apparitions of God and the angels to Abraham, and now why don't see him being manifested in the physical like it used to be?
Excellent question. And I'm trying to give you a broad Jewish answer. And the broad Jewish answer is that God's active involvement in terms of prophecy and whatnot ended with the last of the Jewish prophets, which are generally referred to as Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And those are the last three of the Jewish prophets. And Jewish tradition says that prophecy, in that sense, God's active involvement, speaking to and through people, ended what now would be 2,400 years ago. So I don't know of people today who speak about God spoke to me. I mean, that is not part of mainstream Jewish teaching and understanding.
So where is God hiding? Like, what was the point of being so active and then retrieving? And how are people supposed to experience God if it's not through prophets?
Good question. I would use the broad analogy of parents at some point need to let their children live their own lives, make good decisions, maybe make some not so good decisions, but at a certain point, children have to stand up in their own right. And God, in that sense, as the great parent, at some point said, "You now have to do it yourself." So again, in terms of Jewish tradition, prophecy in that sense of direct God speaking directly to people ended 2,400 years ago.
How do you feel about the academic perspective that the Israelite religion was influenced by all the other groups around them, the Canaanites, the Hittites, and groups like that, and that it's all just a hodgepodge of different deities put together? And to connect it to demonology, some of the incantations that I've come across have to do with the names of God, that if you are able to use the name of God or the name of an angel, you're able to bind these forces and get rid of them. So, but they say that the names of the gods of the Canaanites are the same as the different titles of God. So, how do you work with that?
I mean, if we're talking about biblical times, which really we're talking about something which is roughly close on to 5,000 years ago till about 2,400 years ago. So over the thousands of years of biblical thought, that of course they were influenced culturally by people with whom, alongside whom they lived, but Israelite tradition, it's a misnomer to call it Judaism, but call it Israelite religion, developed over the years. So was it influenced somewhat by their neighbors? Of course. Sometimes influenced positively, sometimes negatively, in the sense of our neighbors are doing A, B, C, D. We're not going to be doing A, B, C, D. So it's very much sometimes seeing parallels, and then sometimes seeing very much a different approach to how one responds to God and the expectations that one has of your fellow human beings.
Are you familiar with the Book of Enoch? And there's different versions. You know, there's the before the Common Era Enoch, and then the one in between, and then the Talmudic third book of Enoch. And in my conversations with different Jewish folks regarding the Second Temple period and the different sectarian groups, they want to demarcate, you know, what's truly Jewish and what it's not, and what are sectarian groups like the Jewish Christians and stuff like that. And now there's this thing where there was interpolation between all these different groups for hundreds of years. Have you come across that, where different groups are trying to define themselves as the true Jews or the true Israel, and they decline one perspective or the other to try to prove their superiority? Has that ever come up in the question of exorcism, where like who really understands the spiritual world and who doesn't?
No, and the short answer to your question is no, I don't have any experience with that.
The Dead Sea Scrolls talk about some stuff that could be applied to also, you know, trying to avoid the darkness or the light. There's a passage where it says that the children of light are going to fight against the children of darkness.
Right.
Have you come across that?
I'm aware that there are some passages which speak, as you said, about the children of light and the children of darkness and whatnot. I know very little about the Dead Sea Scrolls, so I couldn't. I'm aware of some things which are in it, but that's not an area of interest of mine, and certainly it's not an area of knowledge.
And as you have spoken about this experience with people from other faiths, where have you found commonalities and things to connect with and build bridges through this?
Well, in terms of, let's say, working with fellow chaplains, certainly as chaplains, we understand the importance of being board certified and taking clinical pastoral education and developing that you become a professional chaplain. So in that sense, there's a lot of sharing of commonalities in terms of pastoral care and pastoral counseling. So in that sense, there's a broad agreement amongst chaplains about how one does chaplaincy or how one does not do chaplaincy.
So what about the concept of God, the concept of human nature, the way that we deal with our problems? Is there things in relation to exorcism and finding comfort in God that people have come up to you and said, what you spoke really connected with my way of helping our patient?
Yeah. I retired over 10 years ago, so my information is very limited in terms of active chaplaincy. I know that for a number of years back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, that we had international conferences where the National Association of Catholic Chaplains met with the Association of Professional Chaplains. The Canadian group came to it at the National Association of Jewish Chaplains. So there was that kind of interchange. Whether those kind of international conferences are still going on, I'm not up to date on that.
But what was the reaction of the Christian chaplains when you told them about this experience?
About
the
exorcism?
Yes, cleansing the room.
Yeah, well, the Christian chaplains, like the Jewish chaplains, found it interesting, found it fascinating. They personally had not done it, but they saw that it was. They took my word for it that this was something which I did and which was effective, and so without necessarily saying that they would do the same thing, they certainly validated that what I had to say made sense.
There's a book by Jacob Neusner called The Wonder-Working Rabbis of the Talmud. And in that one, he has all kinds of mystical experiences that the rabbis were partakers of, including creating a golem, a golem that was like a cow and they eat it, and some miraculous stuff that they do. Do you consider all that homiletical, like you were saying, that it's like helping people connect with the Bible? Or is it a possibility that there was some manifestations and experiences that they had that were powerful?
Well, Jacob Neusner was a great Jewish scholar, and I know that he wrote multiple books. I'm not familiar with that book. Yes, I'm sure that one can look into the Talmud and find examples of wonder-working rabbis. You also find in the Talmud that the rabbis, at least the way I read it, certainly had a good sense of humor. And one of the sections in the Talmud, in the first order, which is known as Barachot, blessings, a rabbi says, if you want to really know and want to really see an evil spirit, you take and then he goes into this long explanation. You take the afterbirth of a black female cat who is the direct descendant of another black cat, of another black cat, of another black cat, and you take the afterbirth and you burn it in fire, and then you mix it with dust, and if you put that in your eye, you'll be able to see the demons. Now, clearly, the rabbi was just making fun. He was just making something up. So what you find in the Talmud are serious discussions, and you also find these very purposefully humorous, really making fun of the whole notion of demons and that sort of thing. But as I said earlier, it was written in Babylonia, which again today would be Tigris, Euphrates rivers, modern Iraq, and there were beliefs in folk and demons in the folk religion of Babylonia, and this influenced the rabbis. Now, how much they actually believed it was so, different rabbis have different ideas.
And speaking of wild stories, I remember two stories where Hasatan, or what people call Satan, appears as a beautiful woman to a couple of rabbis, and one is tempted by her and climbs up a tree trying to get to her, and then he decides to die instead of sinning against God. And then another one is going through a bridge, and the same thing. Again, do you think that these are stories to connect the faithful to the commandments, or are they possible experiences they had and they try to make sense of
them? Who knows? It's a good question. We just don't know the answer to that question. How much of this was made up? How much of it was some sort of an attempt at trying to explain an experience that that particular rabbi had? We just have no idea. And just because it says in the Talmud, Rabbi so-and-so said such and such, we don't know that that Rabbi so-and-so actually said such and such. It may be attributed to him. So the fact is that the Talmud was written between the year 200 in the Common Era and 500 in the Common Era. So that's over a 300-year period, which is getting on to 2,000 years ago. The fact is, we just do not know. We have the documents, we just do not know how factual they are using facts and history as we use it in modern times today.
Wonderful. Well, we want to thank you, Rabbi Zucker, for being with us. We appreciate your knowledge and your experience, and we'll be broadcasting this tomorrow on Radio Free Nashville. I will send you the link, and then we'll post it on our YouTube channel as well.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and I wish you good wishes, and may your group that listens to this find this helpful and enlightening. Thank you very much for your time.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye now.